and off you go.
Okay, thank you. This is Informix version 14 new features. I'm specifically covering stuff that was not in the first fix pack. I think a lot of people have covered that previously. I know Scott Pickett did a lot of work on that as well. So I thought I'd cover more of the stuff that's happened after the first fix pack. The more recent stuff. There's been a lot of good stuff come in the product. So version 14 has been around for quite a while. The fix pack 2 was end of 2019, very shortly followed by fix pack 3, and fix pack 4 in the middle of 2020, and fix pack 5 at the end of 2020, and then fix pack 6 June this year. I've highlighted the ones that will include demos. So one of the perhaps less used items is Sharded Queries. You can now, they've done some simplification on that where you don't need a enterprise replication. It's based upon enterprise replication, but you now don't need that on edge servers in your network of Informix servers. It survives against node failures, and you can now do joins on sharded queries. So, these are the FC2 enhancements. So they've done some more work on joins. They're always improving features in fix packs. Even something as complex as sharded queries that involves using multiple table that's spread across multiple Informix servers, using enterprise replication to synchronize that. Even that's had enhancements in a fix pack as well. So they do touch some quite large stuff there that appears in fix packs. There's a new Java API for change data capture streaming. So you can now stream data for change data capture, but you've got a Java API behind that as well now. They've done some relatively simple SQL enhancements as well that I've got some demos for. So I'll start with the simplest ones going forward, and then go up to more complex ones. So for club columns, you can now use direct strings in SQL. I'll start with a simple demo for that. This is a newly installed version 14 FC6 server. It's a brand new environment. So I'm going to create a table, and I'm going to put into that table a club column called order desk. And now I can actually put a simple string into there as well. So this wouldn't work prior to FC2, but if I run that now on FC6, as you'd expect, you can insert the row into your club column, where it includes for the club column. That includes just a simple string. You don't have to pull that in from a file to club anymore and store your club data in a file. If you just want to put a simple string into your club, you can do that directly now. It simplifies application development. They've also added a UUID keyword and function. What this does, it generates a universally unique string, which you can then use to actually uniquely identify things, not just on your existing Informix server, but across Informix servers as well. And the idea is it's meant to be unique across your whole database estate. Of that one as well. So the way you have to do this actually is it's kind of built into the product, but it's kind of not. So you actually have to, although the implementation is built in, this is the default installation on version 14, there has actually a Java UDR, user-defined function, user-defined routine that actually implements this. You actually have to go in and run a create function statement to actually create the UUID function, and you can name it something else. But as per the documentation, they want you to call it UUID, make it standard across all the different environments, and you can try and execute to public on that. It's kind of interesting that there is something that's built in, but to use it, you have to actually run a create function command on your environment. So you have to kind of almost finish the deployment yourself. That creates it. And for those who haven't seen it before, you can, if you've got a function, you can just do a select and call the function directly. You don't have to select from a table. You can just say select and then my function, assuming you've got no, in this case, no parameters. That's quite the simplest version. But you can actually directly call functions without needing to select from a table. And if I run that, we get a string, which is designed to be unique across not just on this Informix server, but across all servers worldwide. So every time you run it, you get a different unique string. Allows you to generate a universally unique identifier across all your database estate. The next one is partial index, which is quite an interesting one. Currently, at the moment, when you create an index, you have to index every row in your data, even if you don't want to index every row. So, for example, if you're only interested in items that haven't been processed, or items that haven't been processed yet, for example, orders that haven't been processed yet, but that's the only bit you really want to query on, you have to create an index on every single order that you have, which obviously A will be large, but also involves having to, every time you move an order to make it already processed, you have to update that index as well. So you're every single row in the table, if you update the index column, you always have to do a write to the database, which can be expensive as well. In FC2, what you find is you can actually create an index, and you can actually index only part of your data. So I can create a index on multiple columns. I'm going to say for my orders table, I'm going to create an index for the ones, say whether they're completed or not. And I'm going to also have the order ID in there as well, so I can find the order ID for all the ones that are not yet completed. And what happens is they've used the fragment by expression capability already built into the database, so they're reusing existing functionality within the database engine to get this to market more quickly. And you say, so you create your index as you would a fragmented by expression index, but you say for part of it, you say index off, which means it never actually writes out that part of the index. It does mean that the index can only be used when you're doing something that satisfies the other part of the index, which actually does exist and does take up storage space. So, for example, something like this, if you're only concerned about orders that are not completed, you're not having to incur writes every time you put an order in, maybe that's already completed. But also you don't have to pay the storage space costs for this. So you could dramatically reduce your storage space costs for these type of indexes, where the bulk of your data you have index off and you're not paying for any storage for that in terms of index storage costs, but you can still use the query for the bit where the index actually does exist and get your results back very quickly. What this could also mean is the index, because the index is much smaller, the index might actually have less height to it. So actually the reads from the index have to do less each read from the index has to read less index pages going down the tree of the index. So it could actually also reduce the number of reads that you have and improve performance as well. I'll take a quick demo of what that looks like. I'll create my index. And then in the system catalogs, you actually get, it appears in sys indexes as a normal index. So you get your index as normal. Get the one row for your index that says, this is my index, this is the table, tab ID is on the table. This is the columns that are encoded, the numbers for the columns that are part of the index. You've got your one row for your index as normal. You also, because it's a fragmented index now, you get entries into sys fragments for the index that say these are my two fragments for my index. So as normal, it appears as a fragmented index. So you have the first part that's we had in root DBS, which was index off. So although the index is off and there is no, you're not actually storing, you're not storing the index pages for that index, it still appears in sys fragments as a fragment of your index in root DBS with the expression for completed is Y as well. And then you get the next row in there that says, here's where I'm actually storing the index entries. For completed is N and it's in data DBS. So it appears just as a normal index in the system catalog. I'm going to dig in a bit more at some point and work out where it stores this index off bit. But yeah, it appears as a normal index with the two fragments in your index. There are some CDR enhancements in FC2 as well. When you list a replicate, you can now use the replica ID, the numeric value for the replicate in decimal or hex as well. So when you're listing replicates. If you are using enterprise replication, there is a nice one where if you're doing it, there's a migrate server command that does a parallel data load using raw tables and does parallel index builds as well. There's done quite a lot of development there. Having the data load happen in parallel, using the raw tables so it's not logged, make it faster, and doing all the parallel index builds for you as well for large environments. There are statement cache enhancements. They've actually put some, previously you could look at this using onstat, but they've actually put stuff in there now where you can look at, there's a sysmaster table for it that allows you to see the what's in the statement, what statements are in the statement cache. And you can actually now invalidate specific statements in the statement cache, and you can lock them into the statement cache as well, so they won't be evicted if the statement cache gets busy. That is, got a demo for that. That's quite a nice one to look at. So this is, if I have this figured out as a default server. So let me clear my statement cache. If I turn it off. Up to now, what you could do is you have items in the statement cache. The only way to clear them was to turn it off. You can turn it off, and you find this. This one might be one I've locked in there. You normally wouldn't have anything in there. Turn it back on again. If I query I've got one in there at the moment. If I then query the new table in sysmaster, I can see basically pretty much the same information. It says I have the one entry. It's not currently valid, and it's not locked in there at the moment. I have an entry in there that's not available. If I then go in, you can actually, to make things invalid, I'll put another entry in there. This one. there you go. So I added another one in there. By querying that system catalog table, it gets locked into, it gets put in the statement cache, although it's not locked in the statement cache currently. It's just in there. So oddly enough, what you can actually do is you can say, okay, I want to make this invalid, this entry in the statement cache. And oddly enough, what you actually do is you update a sysmaster table, which you wouldn't normally do. And in previous releases, they were advised not to update sysmaster tables, even if it was possible. But now the actual recommended one, that the way to actually make this entry invalid in the statement cache so it's no longer used, is to actually update it and set the value column in this table to 0. So they now say update sysmaster tables that they never said to do before. So if you are absolutely not valid, and I look at my statement cache there, now that one's no longer valid. It's got a D against it, so it's no longer valid. And if I query that table, the new sysmaster table, there's the one I set. It was the valid is 0 there. It's no longer valid. That's select. So you can invalidate it. You can even then lock things into this now into the statement cache as well. So you can actually take one of the entries. I'll take my update statement, for example. It's not currently locked in there. If I just update that lock column to 1, again, updating a sysmaster table, and set that across to 1. And when I look at it, it's now, that's the trouble with demos, all your IDs end up changing. And look at there, there you go. It's now locked in the statement cache. It's got an L against it. So you can lock items in the statement cache to make sure so they don't get purged out of the statement cache if the statement cache gets busy. Again, in this new sysmaster catalog table, you have a locked column as well. So that's now locked in the statement cache as well. So if you've got applications where specific bits of your processing need to be very responsive, you can use the statement cache to improve performance, but then you can actually lock things in the statement cache to say these particular statements that I'm running, which could be maybe a query that is you run very frequently, that customers need to, that management need to be able to see all the time. Then you can lock it in there as well. So you guarantee response times to some extent on the query. Well, nice feature. The client SDK now supports connection pooling for ODBC connections, I believe. Don't have a demo for that one. There is more connection pooling available now. Client SDK. And FC2. FC3, interestingly enough, there were no real enhancements to FC3. They just updated the GS kit that can be used for SSL connections. They upgraded that to a new version. That was mainly a fix pack that was bug fixes. I believe there was about 7 bug fixes in that release. So although it was a fix pack, they didn't really introduce any new functionality. They had more fixes in that, more fixes in that fix pack. Then FC4 came along, and we got a lot more fixes and a lot more enhancements as well. So Client SDK now includes installing Informix.NET Core as well. They support .NET Core Client SDK. They updated the wire listener, which is used for Mongo and REST APIs, and MQT listeners as well. They updated that to support later MongoDB versions, 4.2. And they added authentication in for the REST and MQTT listeners as well. I have done previous talks on those at the IIUG conference for giving demos of all of these things, but they've enhanced them as well. It's called they have a listener for this, and it's called the wire listener, and they've enhanced that for a couple more enhancements on there. Again, along with that, updating to newer supporting newer standards for spatial temporal queries. They support new standards on that as well. Anyone using spatial queries or spatial and temporal queries, they just update to new standards. In line with the connection pooling enhancements, they've added a few properties for ODBC connection pooling. You can specify the minimum size of the pool. So you always have this many connections available in the pool, and you can have a maximum connection limit for the pool as well. So a bit more control over the sizing of the connection pool. And there's a setting you can set called client label, which then appears in non-stat commands for that session. So it makes it easier to identify sessions. So for example, if you've got something that's doing update statistics, you might set a client label on that to say update statistics. And then in the monitoring thing, where people are looking at the monitoring side, they can see that there's a client label, so they can identify that it's a DBA maintenance task. That's now supported in ODBC and the SetNet 32 as well. So they have additional support for that as well. They're taking that feature and extending it up to ODBC supports it as well. They have replication enhancements. So when you're looking at RSS, SDS and RSS flow control, you can have, which is where certainly for example for the RSS, if it gets too far behind, it will actually ultimately stop the primary from sending any more transactions. You get more statistics on when these have happened. Gives you a bit more view of, has flow control kicked in? How many times has it kicked in? So you can see if you had lag on your replication, or you had ultimately, if it lags badly enough and the flow control kicks in, ultimately what can happen on your primary server is actually it won't be able to put entries in the log buffer, and ultimately your primary server will stop accepting writes. So you can see more stats around this as to know when this has happened, and that may be why you're seeing some delays on your primary server. They've done some more replications enhancements. They build our referential integrity constraints at the end of a migration. So if you're doing CDR migrates, you get that at the end. They've added another phase into the migrate as well, so there's an add replication check phase. So they've added another phase into the migrate server, and smart trigger replication, it now survives when the session goes away. They've added a bit more onto the smart triggers. That's quite a new feature, the smart triggers. But again, they've improved that in Fix Pack 4. They're always enhancing new features. It is very good to see the fact that features come in and then they do get enhanced as well. They're always working on that. Having said that, they've added a new item in for onstat as well. So they've added another onstat to make things simpler for DBAs monitoring or newer DBAs. You can run onstat -g top. Get a very simple view of activity within your server and top resource consumers inside the server. So it does sampling for a period of time, and it'll come back with how much resource is being used, the top resource consumers. So even on my simple server that's not actually doing anything, it'll tell you the top threads by CPU. There's a periodic thread that runs to do maintenance tasks within the server, and that you can see is the top consumer here. So it's hardly use any CPU time at all, but it is visible. You can see partition disk reads as well. So if I got queries queries running that are actually end up having to read off the disk, i.e. they're not coming out of the buffer pool, then you can see which sessions and activity threads have done that. You can see DB space activity as well. If I was stuff accessing the DB spaces, you can have a look at the physical and logical log activity as well. So you can start to see on a simple level, you've got a very simple dashboard, kind of a dashboard here that shows you these are the top resource consumers. This is the activity happening in my server that I may be concerned about. You have quite a simple way of having a quick snapshot view of your server. What's top resource consumers in the server. Therefore, you can, if you've got performance issues, you can look in. That could be quite a good pane of glass to look at initially, where you can say what's happening in my server, what's going on. They certified on Solaris 11.4. Again, they're supporting Solaris and UOS versions on Solaris. I would expect as Solaris carries on, they may well continue supporting later versions for that as well. But that was the one they highlighted, was the Solaris 11.4 came out. And then one that's very nice for people upgrading to version of 14, they've simplified this. If you've got HDRs and RSSs, then you can have a simpler upgrade process. Previously, to going across major versions, because it was changing the structures of the catalogs, then it wasn't possible. You'd have to basically lose all your secondary servers, take them out of the cluster, then synchronize them again, probably from a backup or from Informix clone, and then therefore you have a period of time where you haven't got quite a long period of time potentially where you haven't got a primary, because you've got a large environment. Now you can actually do major version upgrades into version 14, which require catalog changes, can be done without needing to resync the whole cluster. It's a rolling upgrade for the cluster. Very nice feature for those of us who have RSSs and HDRs. And I've got a simple description of how it works. Notes here. So if you're using connection managers, which some of us are, or HDRs and RSSs, and for example, if you have connection managers will facilitate things like automatic failover for HDRs, then you stop the connection managers, you basically partially shut down your HDR, so you bring it down to quiescent mode and force a checkpoint on it as well. And you stop all your secondary servers in a specific sequence, so you've got to be careful to do these in the right order. Got your RSSs first, then any shared disk secondaries, then the HDR, the last secondary you stop, and then you stop the primary. As for any other version upgrade where system catalogs are changing, you can set conversion guard and restore point directory to allow quick rollback if the upgrade fails. So you can do an onstat -b version and put it back if the upgrade fails. Definitely something I'd recommend. Do this on all nodes in the cluster, so I'd do it at this point. So you've got everything down, the whole cluster's down, go away and just to make sure this is turned on everywhere before you touch anything. I'd definitely recommend that. Get it everywhere. Then you first bring your primary up, and that just not in it on the new version. And that will do the upgrade, update all the catalogs, it'll queue up all the log records to be sent to the other secondaries. And then you just start the other secondaries, the RSSs and HDRs, and run on stat -g cluster to look at them, make sure they've all synced up properly. And then issue a checkpoint on the primary and make sure everything's synced up correctly. And then so this new checkpoint you've done on the primary, make sure that's been replayed out to all your secondaries correctly from on stat -g cluster. And at that point, you then start any shared disk secondaries as well, and then start up your connection managers and allow connections back in. This then means that all your secondaries are back online very quickly. This is quite a short process. It's only system catalog updates. It's a very fast process, and you can script and automate this if you're confident enough to do that. But it is a very quick process, and it does mean that you're not having to upgrade your primary and then spend hours potentially having to copy your primary data all the way, multiple, possibly terabytes of your primary data onto your secondaries, and before you have your secondaries back online, you can have them back online very quickly and have your resilience back up very quickly. It also, you also have the option here, if you have RSSs, you could do is actually not start the RSSs, get everything up and running, and therefore you then have a copy of your database that is before the upgrade. And then if you leave if you leave, say you're an HDR and RSS, you leave the RSS on the old version, it'll have stale data on there, but if you can handle that and your apps can replay data, then if there's a problem on the new version 14, you still have at least one of your secondaries that hasn't been touched by the upgrade, and therefore you can roll back to that if you needed, and then you'd have to have the apps replay all the changes since then. But that is an option, and it does work. And you can have one of your other secondaries not upgraded. That is an option and is available. For one of the things they did do in version 14, the later fixed packs, is the client SDK got upgraded with that as well. That became 1410 FC4W1, sorry, 450, 1410 FC4W1, which came with 1410 FC4W1. And what they did in that initial client SDK upgrade was they removed support for, if using SSL, they removed support for GSKit, and they said you had to use SSL. What that eventually meant was that actually, if you've got connection managers that are using SSL connections as well, they have to be switched across to OpenSSL as well. And that also meant that all your clients that were out there as well would also have to be moved across to SSL at the same time. So if you've got hundreds of client application installations out there, the whole thing, database server, the connection managers, and all your clients have to be upgraded, have to be switched across to SSL at the same time. So what they did was they rolled back that change and put GSKit support back in. So if you are using SSL and you are considering this, then make sure you get client SDK 450 FC5, not FC4W1, if you're using GSKit. One thing to be aware of. FC5 added more enhancements, so to the sharding again. So again, they've done previous enhancements to sharding in one of the previous 14 fixed packs, and they've added more enhancements in there. So for this one, you can, if sharding expressions are not compatible with, if you're joining two tables that are sharded and the sharding expressions are not the same, then rather than failing it now, fail back, it'll do a local joins if expression is not compatible. So it tries to handle the fact that if your two tables are sharded differently, it'll handle that for you. And you can now shard using an in as well. So you can say a bit like when you partition or fragment a table, and that supports an in. You can do that now with your sharding as well, where you're fragmenting a table across different Informix servers. They've made a few more Informix parameters dynamic. The shum total and ext shum add, and now you can dynamically increase them. And in line with operations supporting if exists, so they added in improved release, so they added in you can drop an index if it exists, or you can drop a table if it exists. You can now rename a table if it exists as well. They're always enhancing the SQL operations that are supported. So that's come in. FC6 was the big one. They added TLS 1.2 support, so another later standard for security. You can, for auditing, if you're using on audit and you're doing auditing, you can send all your audits to syslog now, so you can centralize that, and you may have collectors from syslog that then put that into some central repository, so you can do that. PAM now, so if you're using PAM support plugin authentication modules for security, for example, using Kerberos connections, you can now do distributed connections for that. They've added a new thing where for HDRs, you can have non-blocking checkpoints. So RSS has had non-blocking checkpoints. Now you can get that into for HDR as well in FC6. Another good reason to upgrade. Because they support the HDRs as well, they are in the process of renaming the name of the parameter, not to be RSS specific. So it's a secondary non-blocking checkpoints. And I think it might be FC7 RS non-blocking checkpoint will go away. So be aware if you're upgrading, you may need to change your own config, rename it from RSS to sec blocking when you go to FC7 coming down the line. For temporary tables, you can have the server automatically turn off logging for temporary tables. That previously it was either on or off for temporary tables. Now you can say only log my temporary tables on the primary. So again, it's a thing for if you've got secondaries, you can now have it log only on the primary. You also, for people who are using enterprise replication, you can now check the catalog. And they've actually taken some of the stuff that's used for RSS and put that into ER as well. So for RSS, the transports are using the latest fast transport mechanism, which is SMX pipes, and you can have multiple pipes in between your primary and your secondary servers. That transport mechanism has now been put into ER as well. So it's got a faster transport mechanism that can now be more parallel. They've added in-row transaction header. They've renamed where in-row for transaction headers for in-row tables. They've now renamed the parameter. They've just slightly changed the name of the parameter. If you have secondaries on StatMon's GLAQ, which shows you all your apply threads, they've added some more information, and I'll pop up the calendar for that. Yeah, manual for that actually, which is quite a nice view of that. So previously, for the apply threads that you had this information, which was the queue size, total queued entries at the time, and the average depth. Well, you now get a little bit more information on that. So for each apply thread, you now get current and last LSN for each apply thread, because for these RSS, each apply thread is working asynchronously, so they can be at different points in the log stream of log records. So you can see where they are, their current position for each the apply threads. You can see for the current transaction that it's applying, you can see the transaction ID as well. And they have a, by the way, these are not documented yet, but they have a thing called part val. That looks very much like part num, and most of the time it is part num, but apparently it is not always part num, which is why it's not called part num, it's called part val. So if it looks like a part num, it almost certainly is a part num, but if it looks like something else, then maybe something else. That's as much information as I have on that one. But it does allow you to see a bit more as to what transactions are being processed currently by each apply thread and where they are in the log stream, what partition they're processing currently. For secondary servers, if the admin and task functions are now disabled on secondary servers, admin returns -1 and task commands that modify disk structures return an error. So they've made those a bit simpler. You can now back up and restore on RSS nodes, but not if raw tables exist. There is a limitation there. Hopefully that limitation might go away in a future release. For DB space, you can now have mixed page sizes. Previously, what would happen is in DB space temp, you could always create temporary DB spaces with different page sizes, but they wouldn't be used. Now if you in DB space temp, if you have different page size temporary DB spaces, they will be used. although you have no control over which ones are used. So if you do select into temp for an 8K table which has an 8K page size, and you've got multiple page sizes in your temporary DB spaces, all specified in DB space temp, you can't control where that 8K temporary page will go, which DB space will go in. It could use any of them. We have a SysMaster table for looking at temporary table usage. Quick demo for that one. So if I create a temporary table, create a temporary table, and put a row in there, so I've got an extent allocate for that temporary table. And then I have a look at this new SysMaster table. This has been asked for quite a while now, and they've added it in FC6. You get a table that tells you this is the session, this is your part num, this is the name of the table as well, so you can see your temporary tables. Those saw my internal session previously. I had a way of drilling through that using undocumented onstats, but they've now made that a lot simpler. You don't have to start doing anything like that. You've got a system catalog table to look at temporary tables. Yay. For those who want to have queries time out if they take too long, we have that ability now as well. So I actually use the Linux SEQ command, which generates numbers between 1 and whatever value you set to create a table. And I loaded that in. And if I try and just doing an unload, if I set my enable query timeout, and I then try unloading my table, that's a 1 second timeout. It's in seconds. If I then try unloading my table, and if it takes longer than a second, you go, you get statement interrupted, and you get an statement timed out or interrupted, and you get a interrupted system call. So this query timeout, because it took so long, the database server will then treat it as if it's been interrupted. Someone press Control-C on it, and those are the error codes that you get back. If you're replicating to store procedures, it now passes the user ID and session ID as well. So this was an FC1 feature enhanced in FC6. They've added a few time series functions for those who are interested in time series. And for the wire listener, the one that allowed REST or Mongo or MQTT listeners, they've now tidied up the documentation on that as well. They've deprecated a few features, so deployment assistant is going away in a future release, and simple parser communication module for JDBC is going away as well. I might have mentioned already that the client SDK now can install the .NET Core provider as well. And they've added a new advanced option for ODBC. So you can say, if you're using blob and clob data types, it sends some more information to the client to set up the context a bit better on the client side. It means for those using blob and clob data types, your experience might be a bit better on some of your queries. Updates. Any questions on that? Quite a lot in there, actually.
Okay, nobody has any questions? Come on, somebody's got to have some questions for David.
I think there's a lot in there, actually.
A lot to digest.
Yeah, you've got the demos though, so you've got stuff to actually. I'll have those in with the slide deck as well. I'll send them across to you. I've slightly updated these slides to be a bit clearer, so I'll send those across to you, Rhonda, as well.
I got a lot of nice presentations, so that's good.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I'm just about good on time as well.
All right. I do have, before everybody starts signing off here, I did get on the phone with Carlton, and what we're going to do for those of you who are worried about caffeine tonight to stay up for Carlton's tutorial, we are going to come up with a different time, probably next week, and invite all of our non-USA attendees to view his recording that day. So you'll have one shot to view the recording, and we'll give you a special invite for that. So you guys do not have to stay up all night for Carlton's tutorial.
Oh, nice. I'm non-US based as well, so I'm UK based, so that's nice.
Yep. So as long as you're non-US, you'll get a special invite, and we'll pick a better time for Carlton's tutorial.
Brilliant.
And he's going to make an announcement too. If I don't know if you want to log in just enough to hear what he has to say about the special time, but we're going to let everybody else know that too.
Brilliant, because I'm interested in the certification as well. I've got all the certifications, so I'm looking to. I've always got to have the full set, so I'll be looking to do that one as well. I think
So
you said
if anybody has any questions on that, feel free to reach out to conference@iiug.org. And we'll try to answer that for you. So hopefully that puts a lot of you guys at ease.
I think didn't you say for the certification as well that the testing is available from the 15th, is it?
Yeah, starting October 15th.
Yep.
I believe that's the right date.
Yeah. And I think people have to keep their registration information as well to sign up for that, don't they?
Yes, you do. You'll need your email address and the name that you registered under.
Oh yes, 90 days, isn't it, to take the test?
Right, 90 days after the end of the conference to take your test. So I think that's like January 7th or something around that date.
Brilliant.
So basically you have the rest of the year.
Cool. Shall we wrap it up there then?
Okay. We thank you again, David.
Thank you for having me.
Everybody enjoy the rest of your day or your night.
Yeah.
And thanks again.